At a Saturday lunch, my fiancée announced, "The wedding is off. I won't live with a loser." She said it loud enough for the restaurant to hear. I said, "Thank you for your honesty." I pocketed the ring and said I'd be throwing a narrow escape party. Her family stopped laughing when I shared one detail. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached." I should have known it was coming. The signs had been there for weeks, maybe months, but I had chosen to ignore them. Malaya had been distant, checking her phone more often, finding excuses to work late. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that Saturday afternoon at Marconi's Italian restaurant. The place was packed with the usual weekend crowd. The smell of garlic and fresh basil filled the air, mixing with the sound of clinking glasses and animated conversations. Malaya had suggested we meet her family for lunch, something about important news to share. I should have been suspicious, but I had been trying so hard to make things work between us. I arrived 10 minutes early, as always. Punctuality was something my father had drilled into me since I was a kid. I found our table near the back, under the warm glow of Edison bulbs strung across exposed brick walls. Margaret and Richard, Malaya's parents, were already seated, along with her brother David and sister Jessica. They greeted me with the same forced politeness they always did, the kind that made it clear I would never quite measure up to their standards. "Sean," Margaret said, barely looking up from her menu, "you're early." "Traffic was lighter than expected," I replied, taking my seat. The white tablecloth was crisp and clean, and I found myself smoothing it down nervously, though I couldn't explain why. Richard glanced at his expensive watch, a Rolex that probably cost more than I made in 3 months, at least according to what they thought I made. "Where's Malaya? She said this was urgent." "She'll be here," I said, checking my own watch. It was my father's old Timex, nothing fancy, but it had never failed me, unlike some people. When Malaya finally arrived 15 minutes later, she looked different. Her usual warm smile was replaced by something colder, more calculated. She was wearing a designer dress I had never seen before, and that Louis Vuitton handbag she claimed she couldn't afford but somehow always seemed to have new versions of. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. She kissed her parents on the cheek but barely acknowledged me. The conversation during lunch was stilted, awkward. David talked about his latest investment deals, Jessica showed off photos from her recent vacation to the Hamptons, and Margaret complained about the service, even though our waiter Tony had been nothing but professional. I found myself barely touching my food, a knot forming in my stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. It was during dessert that Malaya dropped the bomb. She stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. The sound cut through the restaurant's ambient noise like a knife. Other diners turned to look, curious about the commotion. "I have an announcement to make," she said, her voice carrying across the room. She wasn't even trying to be discreet. I felt my blood turn cold. This wasn't how someone announced an engagement or a pregnancy. This was something else entirely. "The wedding is off," she declared, her voice getting louder with each word. "I won't live with a loser." The words hit me like a physical blow. Around us, conversations stopped. I could feel dozens of eyes turning in our direction, but Malaya didn't seem to care. If anything, she seemed to be enjoying the attention. "I deserve better than someone who makes $35,000 a year as a freelance consultant," she continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "I deserve a man with ambition, with success, with a future." Her family was nodding along, as if this had all been planned. Margaret had a satisfied smirk on her face, and Richard was actually chuckling. David was recording with his phone, probably thinking this would make a great story for his banker friends. I sat there for a moment, letting her words wash over me. 2 years and 4 months. That's how long we had been together, 8 months engaged, and this was how it was ending, in front of a restaurant full of strangers and her smug family. But instead of the humiliation I should have felt, instead of the anger or heartbreak, something else rose up inside me. Relief. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the engagement ring box. $8,500 I had spent on that ring, not because I couldn't afford more, but because I wanted to see what really mattered to her. "Thank you," I said, my voice calm and steady. "Thank you for your honesty." Malaya blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Around the table, her family's expressions shifted from amusement to confusion. I pocketed the ring and stood up, straightening my tie. "I'll be throwing a narrow escape party next weekend. You're not invited." Margaret's laugh died in her throat. "Excuse me." "I said thank you," I repeated, meeting each of their gazes. "You've just saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." David lowered his phone, frowning. "What's that supposed to mean?" I pulled out my wallet and placed enough cash on the table to cover the bill, plus a generous tip for Tony, who had been watching the whole scene with wide eyes. $147 total, which I could afford without even thinking about it, though they didn't know that. "It means," I said, looking directly at Malaya, "that I now know exactly who you really are." Her face went pale. For the first time since she'd started her little performance, she looked uncertain. "What's that supposed to mean?" Richard demanded, his voice sharper now. I smiled, and I could see it unsettled them. It wasn't the smile of a broken man or someone begging for a second chance. It was the smile of someone who had been holding all the cards and was finally ready to play them. "Let's just say," I said, adjusting my father's watch on my wrist, "some people discover too late what they've lost." I turned to leave, but Malaya's voice stopped me. "You're bluffing," she said, but her voice wavered. "You're just a consultant. You drive a 2012 Honda. You live in a tiny apartment in Queens." I turned back to face her, my expression unchanged. "Do I?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, her family's confident expressions were beginning to crack. Margaret's smirk had disappeared entirely, and Jessica was staring at me with something that looked like fear. "You're just trying to save face," David said, but he sounded less certain than before. "Am I?" I asked. "Funny thing about assumptions, David. Sometimes they make you miss what's right in front of you." I could see Malaya's mind racing, trying to process what I was implying. 2 years and 4 months, and she had never once asked the right questions, never wondered why I never seemed stressed about money, never worried about bills, never hesitated to pick up expensive dinner tabs. "I don't know what game you're playing," Richard said, standing up, "but my daughter deserves better than whatever this is." "Your daughter," I said quietly, "just threw away something she'll never get back." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the other diners seemed to sense the shift in the room's energy. Tony had stopped pretending to clean glasses and was openly staring now. I reached into my other pocket and pulled out a business card, but not the generic ones I usually carried. This one was different, heavier stock, embossed letters. I placed it on the table in front of Malaya. "When you realize what you've done," I said, "don't call me." Then I walked away, leaving them sitting there with their mouths open and their assumptions crumbling around them. Behind me I could hear urgent whispers, the scrape of chairs, and Malaya's voice calling my name. But I didn't turn around. As I stepped out into the crisp March air, I felt lighter than I had in months. The test was over, and the results were exactly what I had suspected they would be. Malaya had failed spectacularly, and her family had shown their true colors along with her. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't called in a while. Elena picked up on the second ring. "Sean, how did it go?" "Exactly as predicted," I said, walking toward my car. "She took the bait completely." "And her family?" "They were all in on it, just like we thought they would be." There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Sean. I know you were hoping we were wrong." I stopped walking and looked back at the restaurant. Through the window I could see Malaya and her family in heated discussion, probably trying to figure out what had just happened. "No," I said finally, I'm not sorry at all. This was the best thing that could have happened. Because now I knew the truth, and the truth was about to set me free in ways Malaya couldn't even imagine. Her family had stopped laughing when I shared one detail, but they had no idea what was coming next. The drive back to my apartment in Queens gave me time to think, really think, about how I had ended up in that restaurant. As I navigated the familiar streets, passing the bodega where I bought my morning coffee and the dry cleaner where I took my few good suits, I realized that this day had been inevitable from the moment I met Malaya 2 years and 4 months ago. It was November 21st, 2021, at that little coffee shop on Astoria Boulevard. The place always smelled like cinnamon rolls and played indie music that was just loud enough to drown out conversations. I had been there working on my laptop, reviewing contracts for my consulting business, when she bumped into my table and spilled her latte all over my papers. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," she had said, immediately grabbing napkins and trying to clean up the mess. She was beautiful, with dark hair that caught the light and green eyes that seemed genuinely apologetic. "Let me buy you another coffee. Actually, let me buy you lunch. I feel terrible." I should have seen it then, the way her eyes quickly scanned my laptop, my clothes, my watch. The way she lingered when I mentioned I was a consultant, probing gently about what kind of consulting, what kind of clients. But I was lonely and she was charming, and I let myself believe that her interest was genuine. The early months were good, or at least I thought they were. Malaya was attentive, affectionate, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. She never complained when I suggested modest restaurants or free activities like walking through Central Park. She even seemed charmed by my simple lifestyle, calling it refreshingly authentic compared to the materialistic men she usually dated. But slowly, things began to change. It started with small comments. "You know, Sarah's boyfriend just got promoted to senior partner at his law firm." Or, "Jessica's husband bought her a new BMW for her birthday. Isn't that sweet?" Never direct criticism, always wrapped in innocent observations that somehow made me feel like I was failing at something. Then came the suggestions. Maybe I should network more, attend industry events, consider joining a country club. When I explained that my consulting work was more specialized and didn't require that kind of networking, she would nod and smile, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes. The worst part was meeting her family. Our first dinner at their Westchester home was like walking into a job interview I was destined to fail. Margaret greeted me at the door of their marble foyer, her smile polite but cold as the air conditioning that kept their oversized house at a constant 68 degrees. "So you're the consultant Malaya's been telling us about," she said, leading me through rooms filled with expensive furniture and artificial flower arrangements that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Richard was waiting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand and skepticism written across his face. David, the investment banker, made no effort to hide his disdain, immediately launching into stories about his latest deals and the celebrities he rubbed elbows with at exclusive events. "Consulting," he had said that first night, the word dripping with condescension. "That's interesting. What kind of consulting exactly?" "Strategic business consulting," I had answered truthfully. "I help companies optimize their operations and improve efficiency." "Ah," Margaret had said, nodding as if she understood but clearly dismissing it as unimportant. "That sounds very, practical." Jessica had been kinder, but even her questions felt like gentle interrogations. Where did I live? What kind of car did I drive? Did I have any plans for expansion? Each question was a small cut, designed to establish exactly where I stood in their social hierarchy. The answer, as they saw it, was at the bottom. Over the months, their treatment of me became a pattern. I was tolerated, not welcomed, included but never truly accepted. They would make plans in front of me that I wasn't invited to, discuss people and places I couldn't afford to know about, and constantly compare me to the successful men in their social circle. "David's friend Marcus just bought a house in the Hamptons," Richard would say over dinner, making sure I was listening. "Investment banking is really where the money is these days." "Our neighbor's son just made partner at his accounting firm," Margaret would add. 26 years old and already making 6 figures. Some people just have that drive, you know. The message was always clear. I wasn't good enough for their daughter, and I never would be. But here's what they didn't know, what Malaya didn't know, what nobody knew except for Elena, my business partner. The consulting work I talked about wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. I had started Meridian Strategic Solutions in June of 2021, 6 months before I met Malaya. What began as a legitimate consulting business had quickly evolved into something much bigger. We specialized in corporate restructuring and efficiency optimization, but our client list included some of the biggest names in technology, finance, and manufacturing. The contracts were worth millions. My personal income last year was $1.8 million, not $35,000. The modest apartment in Queens wasn't all I owned, it was just where I chose to live. The 2012 Honda wasn't my only car, it was the one I drove when I wanted to blend in, to be underestimated. I had built something extraordinary, but I had also learned something valuable about people along the way. Success changes how people see you, but it also reveals who they really are. Some people love you for what you can give them, others for who you are when you have nothing to give. I wanted to know which kind of person Malaya was, so I created a test, one that would reveal her true character. I lived modestly, spoke humbly about my work, and watched how she treated me when she thought I was just another struggling consultant. For 2 years and 4 months I maintained the charade, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she was different. The signs were all there, of course. The way she always let me pay for dinner but never seemed concerned about the cost. The designer items that appeared in her wardrobe, despite her claims of financial stress. The way she would disappear for hours, claiming work obligations that seemed increasingly suspicious. Last month, I had hired a private investigator, not because I enjoyed being paranoid, but because something about Malaya's behavior had shifted. The late nights, the secretive phone calls, the way she would quickly minimize her computer screen when I walked into the room. What I discovered broke my heart, but it also validated every instinct I had been trying to ignore. Malaya wasn't just materialistic and shallow, she was actively planning a future that didn't include me, at least not in the way I had hoped. The details were still coming together, but what I already knew was enough to understand that today's restaurant scene wasn't spontaneous. It was calculated, planned, and executed, with the kind of precision that suggested this had been her goal all along. Sitting in my apartment that evening, looking out at the streetlights reflecting off the windows of neighboring buildings, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The sadness was for the love I thought we had shared, for the future I had imagined with someone who had never really seen me as anything more than a placeholder. The relief was for the bullet I had dodged, for the truth I had finally uncovered, and for the freedom I was about to reclaim. My phone had been buzzing all evening, 17 missed calls from Malaya, 12 from Margaret, 8 from David, and even 3 from Richard. The voicemails were a symphony of confusion, anger, and growing panic as they began to realize that something about their assumptions might have been very, very wrong. I listened to exactly one of them, the most recent from Malaya herself. "Sean, I don't know what you think you're proving, but this is childish. Call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. I know you're hurt, but you can't just walk away from 2 years together because of one fight. Call me." One fight, that's what she called the public humiliation she had, orchestrated in front of a restaurant full of strangers. I deleted the voicemail and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I would begin to show them exactly what they had lost. But tonight, I wanted to sit with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had finally seen through their masks, just as they were about to discover what had been hidden behind mine. The test was over, and the real education was about to begin. Monday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that matched the storm brewing in Malaya's world. I knew she would be calling, texting, maybe even showing up at my apartment. What I didn't expect was for her to be waiting in the lobby of my building at 7:30 in the morning looking like she hadn't slept. She was still beautiful, even with dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. But now I could see past the surface, past the carefully constructed image she had maintained for 2 years and 4 months. "We need to talk," she said the moment I stepped out of the elevator. Her voice was different now, missing the confidence she had displayed at the restaurant. "You can't just ignore my calls forever." I checked my father's Timex and shook my head. "I have a meeting at 8, this will have to wait." "A meeting?" She almost laughed. "Sean, drop the act. I know you don't have any important meetings. You're a freelance consultant who works from coffee shops." I paused at the lobby door, my hand on the handle. Through the glass I could see my Honda parked at the curb, but I also noticed something else. A black Mercedes sedan was waiting across the street, engine running. My driver was early. "Follow me," I said simply. Malaya hurried to keep up as I walked past my Honda without even glancing at it. Her confusion was evident as I approached the Mercedes, and her eyes widened when the driver stepped out to open the rear door for me. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," the driver said with professional courtesy. "Good morning, Marcus," I replied, sliding into the leather seat. After a moment's hesitation, Malaya climbed in beside me, her mouth slightly open. "Where are we going?" she asked as Marcus pulled into traffic. "To my office," I said, watching her face carefully. "You wanted to talk. We'll talk." The drive through Manhattan gave her time to process what was happening, though I could see her mind struggling to reconcile what she was experiencing with what she thought she knew about me. The Mercedes was immaculate, with cream leather seats and the kind of quiet luxury that only comes with serious money. "Sean," she started several times, then stopped, apparently unsure how to proceed. When we pulled up in front of the glass tower on Park Avenue, Marcus was there immediately to open our doors. The building's lobby was all marble and chrome, with security guards who nodded respectfully as we passed. "Good morning, Mr. Harrison," the concierge said. "Your 8 o'clock is already waiting in the conference room." I thanked him and guided Malaya toward the elevators. Her silence was telling. This wasn't the modest office building she might have expected for a small-time consultant. This was the kind of place where major deals happened, where serious money changed hands. The elevator carried us smoothly to the 32nd floor, where the doors opened onto a reception area that spoke of understated wealth. Behind a mahogany desk sat Elena, my business partner, and the one person who knew the complete truth about my double life. "Good morning, Sean," she said with a professional smile, then nodded politely at Malaya. "Ms. Torres, I presume?" Elena was elegant in the way that comes from genuine success rather than desperate aspiration. Her gray suit was perfectly tailored, her dark hair styled with effortless sophistication. Everything about her presence made it clear that this was a woman who belonged in rooms where million-dollar decisions were made. "Your 8 o'clock meeting can wait 15 minutes, Elena continued. "I thought you might need some privacy first." I led Malaya through double doors into my office, watching her reaction as she took in the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than most people's salaries. My mahogany desk was clear except for a few carefully chosen items. A photo of my parents, my father's old toolkit from his construction days, and a crystal paperweight that had been a gift from my first major client. "Sit down," I said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from my desk. Malaya sank into the chair, her eyes darting around the office as if she were trying to convince herself this wasn't real. "I don't understand," she finally whispered. I opened my laptop and turned the screen toward her. On it was the website for Meridian Strategic Solutions, my company. The client testimonials included names she would recognize, Fortune 500 companies that had paid millions for our services. "Meridian Strategic Solutions," I said calmly. "I founded it 3 years ago. We specialize in corporate restructuring and efficiency optimization. Last year, we generated $12 million in revenue." Her face went pale. $12 million? "My personal income was $1.8 million, I continued, my voice steady. "The modest lifestyle you witnessed was a choice, not a necessity." Malaya stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I could see her trying to process not just the numbers, but what they meant, what they had always meant. "You lied to me," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I never lied," I replied. "I told you I was a consultant. I told you I helped businesses improve their operations. Everything I said was true. I just didn't mention the scale." She was quiet for a long moment, her fingers gripping the arms of the chair. "Why?" she finally asked. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the park, where early morning joggers were making their way along the paths. "Because I wanted to know who you really were." "What do you mean?" I turned back to face her, And for the first time since the restaurant, I let her see some of the hurt I had been carrying. I wanted to know if you could love someone who wasn't wealthy, if you could see value in a person rather than their bank account. "That's not fair," she protested. "You set me up." "I gave you the opportunity to show your true character," I corrected. "For 2 years and 4 months, I waited for you to prove that you cared about me, not what you thought I could provide. Instead, you spent that time making it clear that I wasn't good enough for you." Her eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were from regret or frustration. "But I did care about you. I loved you." "Did you?" I asked quietly. "Because the woman who loved me wouldn't have humiliated me in a restaurant full of strangers. She wouldn't have called me a loser for not meeting her financial expectations." Malaya opened her mouth to respond, but a knock at the door interrupted us. Elena entered carrying a manila folder. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but there's something you both need to see." She placed the folder on my desk and opened it, revealing a series of photographs and documents. My stomach tightened as I recognized what I was looking at, though I had hoped it wouldn't be necessary to show Malaya this evidence. "What is this?" Malaya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elena's expression was professionally neutral, but I could see the disapproval in her eyes. "These are photographs taken over the past 6 weeks, along with financial records and communication logs." The photographs showed Malaya entering and leaving an upscale hotel in Midtown, always with the same man. He was older, distinguished, wearing the kind of expensive suits that signaled serious wealth. The timestamps showed this had been happening regularly, always during her supposed work hours. "His name is Richard Blackwood," Elena continued. "He owns a chain of luxury hotels, net worth approximately $3.5 million. Malaya's face had gone completely white. She reached for one of the photographs with a shaking hand, as if touching it might make it disappear. "The financial records show regular deposits to an account in your name," Elena continued relentlessly. $5,000 monthly for the past 3 months. The communication logs show extensive text and email exchanges dating back 7 weeks. I felt sick looking at the evidence, not because it surprised me, but because it confirmed what I had suspected and hoped was wrong. "How long?" I asked quietly. Malaya was crying now, real tears that probably had more to do with being caught than with actual remorse. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then explain it to me," I said, my voice harder than I intended. She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes, and for a moment I saw something that might have been the real her, stripped of all pretense and manipulation. "I met him at a charity event 6 weeks ago. He started pursuing me, sending gifts, promising things." "What kind of things?" Her voice dropped to barely audible. "Marriage, a life of luxury. He said he would take care of me in a way you never could." The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the depth of her betrayal. "So you were planning to leave me for him?" "I was confused," she said desperately. "You were just a consultant making $35,000 a year. He was offering me everything I had ever wanted." "Everything you wanted," I repeated. "Not love, not partnership, not a real relationship, just money." Elena cleared her throat softly. "There's more," she said, pulling out another set of documents. "Mr. Blackwood is married. He's been married for 22 years. His wife is currently undergoing treatment for breast cancer." Malaya's sob caught in her throat. Even she seemed shocked by this revelation. "He never intended to marry you," Elena continued. "According to his financial records, he maintained similar arrangements with 3 other women. You weren't his escape from his marriage. You were just another transaction." The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at Malaya, really looked at her, and saw someone I had never truly known. The woman I had thought I loved had been willing to betray me for money, and the man she had betrayed me with had been using her just as callously as she had been using me. "Get out," I said quietly. "Sean, please. Get out of my office, get out of my building, and get out of my life." She stood on shaking legs, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "You don't understand. I never meant for this to happen. I thought—" "You thought you could have your cake and eat it too," I finished for her. You thought you could string me along while you explored better options. You thought I was too stupid or too worthless to figure it out. She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference." I heard her footsteps cross the office, heard the door open and close. Elena remained behind, quietly gathering the photographs and documents. "Are you all right?" she asked after a moment. I continued staring out at the park, watching the city come alive below us. I will be. What about her family? They'll want explanations. For the first time all morning, I smiled. Oh, I think they'll get exactly the explanation they deserve. Because now that Malaya knew the truth about my success, it wouldn't take long for her to tell her family. And once they realized what they had encouraged their daughter to throw away, the real reckoning would begin. But there was still more they didn't know, more that would come to light in the days ahead. The affair with Richard Blackwood was just the beginning of the story. The deeper I dug into Malaya's recent activities, the more shocking the truth became, and her family, who had been so quick to judge me as unworthy, were about to discover just how wrong they could be. The call came at 11:47, that same Monday morning. I was reviewing quarterly reports when Elena buzzed through to tell me Margaret was on the line, demanding to speak with me immediately. "Put her through," I said, curious to see how Malaya's mother would handle the new information. "Sean?" Margaret's voice was strained, lacking the condescending tone she usually used with me. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Not over the phone. Can you come to the house today?" I leaned back in my leather chair, watching clouds drift across the park. "I'm rather busy, Margaret. Perhaps you could tell me what this is about." There was a long pause. "Malaya told us about your business, about the money." "Did she? And what exactly did she tell you?" "That you've been lying to us for over 2 years, that you're actually wealthy and you let us think you were some kind of struggling consultant." I almost laughed at the indignation in her voice. "I see. And how does that make you feel, Margaret?" "How does it?" she sputtered, clearly thrown by my calm response. "It makes me feel like you've made fools of us all." "Have I? Because from where I'm sitting, you all made it very clear what you thought of me based on what you believed my income to be. I simply allowed you to reveal your true characters." The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if she had hung up. Finally, she spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "We need to fix this, Sean. Malaya is devastated. She loves you." "Does she?" "Because 3 hours ago she was in my office, and that's not the impression I got." "She made a mistake. We all made mistakes. But you two have been together for over 2 years. That has to count for something." I stood up and walked to my window, looking down at the busy street below. "Margaret, let me ask you something. In all the time you've known me, have I ever been dishonest with you? You lied about your job, your income. I told you I was a consultant who helped businesses improve their operations. That was true. I told you I lived modestly and drove an older car. Also true. I never claimed to be wealthy, and I never claimed to be poor. You made assumptions based on your own biases." She was quiet again, and I could practically hear her mind working, trying to find an angle that would put her family back in control of the situation. "Look," she finally said, "why don't you come to dinner tonight? We can all sit down like adults and work this out. Malaya is family, Sean. You were going to be family too." "We're being the operative phrase," I replied. "But I suppose one final conversation might be in order. I'll be there at 7. After I hung up, Elena knocked and entered my office. "The investigator called," she said, placing another folder on my desk. "You're not going to like what he found." I opened the folder and immediately felt my blood run cold. The documents inside painted a picture far worse than what we had discovered about the affair with Richard Blackwood. "Bank records," Elena said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Malaya has been receiving money from multiple sources over the past 8 months, not just from Blackwood." I studied the financial statements, feeling sick as the pattern became clear. There were deposits from 3 different men, all substantial amounts, all on regular schedules. "Who are they?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Gregory Chen, real estate developer, worth about $2 million, Marcus Hoffman, investment banker, net worth around $4 million, and of course Richard Blackwood." I set down the papers and rubbed my temples. She was running a con. "It gets worse," Elena said gently. "Look at the dates." I examined the timelines more carefully and felt my stomach drop. The first deposits had begun just 3 weeks after Malaya and I got engaged. She had been planning this from the beginning, using our relationship as cover while she cultivated relationships with wealthy men. "There's something else," Elena continued, pulling out a printed email thread. "These are communications between Malaya and her sister Jessica. They were intercepted from Malaya's iCloud account. I read through the messages, each one making me feel more nauseated than the last. Jessica: "How's Operation Upgrade going?" Malaya: "Better than expected. Found 3 potentials, all with serious money. The hotel guy is the most promising, but the banker might leave his wife." Jessica: "What about the fiancé?" Malaya: "He's useful cover, makes me look stable and committed. Plus, he pays for everything without asking questions. I'll dump him once I land one of the real catches." Jessica: "Mom says you should string him along longer, maybe see if you can get money out of him first." Malaya: "Trust me, there's no money there. I've been through everything. He's exactly what he appears to be, a small-time consultant with no prospects. But he's reliable, which is what I need right now." I had to stop reading. The casual cruelty of their words, the calculated manipulation, the complete lack of regard for my feelings or our relationship. It was almost too much to process. "The family knew," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "They were actively encouraging it," Elena confirmed. "There are messages from Margaret, too, giving advice on how to manage multiple relationships without getting caught." I closed the folder and sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For 2 years and 4 months, I had been living with someone who saw me as nothing more than a convenient placeholder while she auditioned for a wealthier replacement. And her family, the people who had made me feel like I wasn't good enough for their daughter, had been helping her every step of the way. "There's one more thing," Elena said hesitantly, "about the timing of Saturday's breakup." I looked at her, dreading what was coming next. Richard Blackwood was supposed to propose to her this weekend. According to her messages with Jessica, that's why she wanted to end things with you so publicly. She wanted to be free and clear when he popped the question. "But he's married." She didn't know that. She thought his wife had died last year. He'd been telling her he was a widower. The irony was almost too much to bear. Malaya had destroyed our relationship for a man who was lying to her just as thoroughly as she had been lying to me. She had thrown away something real for something that was never going to exist. "What are you going to do?" Elena asked. I stood up and straightened my tie. "I'm going to dinner." The drive to Westchester gave me time to process everything I had learned. By the time Marcus pulled into the circular driveway of the Holloway house, I had made my decision about how this evening would unfold. The house looked the same as always, imposing and cold, with its marble columns and perfectly manicured landscaping, but now I saw it differently. It wasn't a symbol of success, it was a monument to superficiality and greed. Margaret answered the door herself, which was unusual. Normally, she would have had someone else do it, maintaining her position as the lady of the manor. But tonight she seemed nervous, almost humble. "Sean," she said, her smile forced. "Thank you for coming." I followed her through the familiar rooms, noting how different everything felt now that I understood the family's true nature. The expensive furniture and artwork that had once intimidated me now seemed gaudy and ostentatious. In the dining room, the whole family was assembled. Richard sat at the head of the table, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit. David was there with his wife Patricia, both of them watching me with barely concealed curiosity. Jessica sat with her husband Mark, and even their teenage son Tyler was present, probably to witness whatever show they had planned. And there was Malaya, sitting in her usual spot, looking like she had been crying for hours. Her eyes were red and puffy, her makeup smeared, her perfect facade completely shattered. "Please sit," Margaret said, gesturing to my usual chair. "I've prepared your favorite meal." I remained standing. "That won't be necessary. This won't take long." Richard cleared his throat and stood up, extending his hand for a handshake. "Sean, I owe you an apology. We all do. We misjudged you, and we're sorry." I looked at his outstretched hand but didn't take it. Are you really sorry, Richard? Or are you sorry that you were wrong about my net worth?" His hand dropped slowly. We made assumptions. That was wrong of us." "You made assumptions based on your belief that a person's value is determined by their bank account," I said, my voice calm but cutting. "And now that you know I have money, you want to pretend that the past 2 years never happened." Margaret stepped forward. "We were protecting our daughter. Any parent would want to know that their child's partner can provide for them." "Provide for them?" I turned to look at Malaya, who was staring at her plate. "Is that what you told them, Malaya, that you needed someone to provide for you?" She looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Sean, please. I know I made mistakes, but we can fix this. I love you." "You love me," I repeated. "Tell me, which version of me do you love? The struggling consultant you dumped on Saturday or the millionaire you discovered on Monday?" "I love you," she insisted. "I've always loved you." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to the email thread Elena had shown me earlier. "Really?" "Because I have some messages here that suggest otherwise." The color drained from her face. "What messages?" I began reading aloud from her conversation with Jessica, watching as her family's expressions shifted from confusion to horror to outrage. When I got to the part about using me as useful cover while she pursued real catches, Margaret gasped audibly. "That's enough," Richard said, but his voice lacked authority. "Oh, but there's more," I continued, reading the messages about managing multiple relationships and Margaret's advice on not getting caught. It seems this was a family enterprise. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Tyler, the teenager, looked uncomfortable with what he was hearing. "We didn't know," Margaret whispered. "We didn't know that there were other men." "But you knew she was planning to leave me," I said. "You encouraged it. You helped her see me as nothing more than a stepping stone to something better." David finally found his voice. "Look, maybe we handled this wrong, but you can't blame us for wanting what's best for Malaya." "What's best for Malaya," I said, "was a man who loved her enough to commit his life to her. What's best for Malaya was someone who would have supported her dreams and stood by her through anything. But that wasn't enough for any of you, was it? Because I wasn't rich enough to impress your friends." I walked around the table, looking at each of them in turn. "The truly tragic thing is that I would have given Malaya everything. Not just money, but love, loyalty, partnership. I would have built a life with her that had real meaning. Instead, you all convinced her to chase fool's gold." Malaya stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "It's not too late, Sean. We can start over. I'll make it up to you, I promise." I looked at her, this woman I had once thought I would marry, and felt nothing but pity. "Malaya, do you even know what love is? Because what you're offering me isn't love. It's a business proposition based on my bank balance." "That's not true," she protested. "Isn't it? If I lost everything tomorrow, if my business failed and I really was just a struggling consultant, would you still want me back?" The question hung in the air, like smoke. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. Her silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought," I said. "You don't love me, Malaya. You love what you think I can give you, and that's not love at all." I turned to address the whole family one final time. "You all taught her that money was more important than character, that wealth was more valuable than genuine affection. Congratulations, you created exactly the kind of person you deserve." As I walked toward the door, Richard called after me. "Wait, Sean, we can work this out. We're family." I stopped and turned back one last time. "No, Richard, we're not family. We never were." Family doesn't treat each other the way you've treated me. Family doesn't manipulate and scheme and measure each other's worth by their net worth. I looked at Malaya one final time. I hope you find what you're looking for, Malaya, but when you do, remember that anything built on lies and greed will eventually crumble. Then I walked out of that house and out of their lives forever. As Marcus drove me back to the city, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders that I hadn't even realized was there. The pain was real, but so was the relief. I had escaped something that would have destroyed me eventually, and I had learned exactly what kind of people I never wanted in my life again. But even as I celebrated my narrow escape, I knew that the full consequences of this revelation were still unfolding. Malaya's world was about to collapse completely, and her family was about to discover that their values had cost them more than they could possibly imagine. The phone calls started at 6 in the morning on Tuesday, first from Malaya, then Margaret, then David, then Jessica. By noon, I had received 43 calls and 27 text messages. I ignored them all, but Elena kept me updated on the escalating desperation in their voicemails. Malaya's offering to sign a prenup, Elena reported during our lunch meeting at a quiet bistro near the office. Margaret says they'll pay for couples counseling. David wants to meet to discuss this like businessmen. I cut into my salmon and shook my head. They still don't understand that this isn't about money or contracts or negotiations. This is about character, and you can't fix that with paperwork. Elena smiled grimly. There's more. Richard Blackwood's wife found out about the affair. She's filing for divorce and naming Malaya as a co-respondent. The hotel chain's board is conducting an investigation into his conduct. And the other men. Gregory. Chen ended his arrangement with Malaya the moment his lawyer advised him it could complicate his upcoming custody hearing. Marcus Hoffman transferred to the London office rather than deal with the potential scandal. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Malaya's carefully constructed web of deception was unraveling, but it was tempered by something else. Despite everything she had done to me, I took no joy in watching her world collapse. I had loved her once, or at least I had loved who I thought she was. What about her family? I asked. That's where it gets interesting, Elena said, pulling out her tablet. David's been bragging about his connection to you at work, telling his colleagues that his sister's ex-fiancé is the Sean Harrison who owns Meridian Strategic. His boss asked if you might be interested in consulting on a major merger they're working on. I raised an eyebrow. David's trying to use my success to advance his own career. It gets better. Margaret's been calling around to their social circle, trying to do damage control. Apparently, she's been telling people that there was a misunderstanding and that you and Malaya are working things out. She's even gone so far as to tell the country club that you'll be joining as soon as the wedding happens. The audacity was breathtaking. Even after everything that had been revealed, they were still trying to manipulate the situation to their advantage, still trying to claim ownership of my success. I think, I said carefully, it's time they understood that their actions have consequences beyond just losing me. Elena's smile was sharp. What did you have in mind? That afternoon, I made 3 phone calls. The first was to David's boss at the investment firm, politely declining their invitation to consult on their merger and mentioning that I preferred not to do business with companies that employed people of questionable character. The second was to the country club Margaret had been bragging to, clarifying that I had no intention of joining and that any claims to the contrary were false. The third call was to Marcus Hoffman in London. Mr. Harrison, he said when he picked up, his voice tense, I want to apologize for any misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, Mr. Hoffman, I interrupted. I'm calling to offer you some advice. Advice? Malaya Torres has been documenting her relationships with wealthy men, text messages, photos, financial records. She's meticulous in her record-keeping. There was a long silence. What are you saying? I'm saying that if I were you, I would have my lawyer review any communication you've had with her, just to be safe. After I hung up, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The revenge was necessary, but it was also draining. I wanted this chapter of my life to be over, so I could move on to something better. but Malaya wasn't ready to let go. At 6:30 that evening, as I was preparing to leave the office, security called to inform me that Malaya was in the lobby, refusing to leave until I agreed to see her. "Send her up," I told them, "but have someone escort her." She appeared in my doorway 5 minutes later, flanked by 2 security guards. She looked terrible, her hair unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, her eyes red from crying. The polished, sophisticated woman I had known was gone, replaced by someone desperate and broken. "Thank you," I told the guards. "You can wait outside." Malaya stepped into my office tentatively, as if she were afraid I might change my mind and have her removed. "Sean, thank you for seeing me." "You have 5 minutes," I said, not looking up from my computer. "I know you hate me," she began, her voice shaking. "I know what I did was unforgivable, but please, you have to understand, I never meant for any of this to happen." I finally looked at her. "Which part? The cheating, the lying, the using me as cover while you auditioned other men, or the publicly humiliating me when you thought you had found someone better?" She flinched at each accusation. "All of it. I was confused, scared. I thought I needed financial security more than I needed love. And now? Now I know I was wrong." She stepped closer to my desk, her hands clasped together. "Now I know that what we had was real, was valuable. I threw it away for money and I was stupid." I leaned back in my chair and studied her face. For a moment I saw a glimpse of genuine remorse, real regret. But then I remembered the emails, the calculating way she had discussed me with her family, the casual cruelty of her plans. "If I had lost my business tomorrow," I said quietly, "if I had remained just a struggling consultant making $35,000 a year, would you be here right now?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. The question hung between us like a sword. "That's what I thought," I said. "But you do have money," she said desperately. "You are successful. We could have a good life together." "Based on what, Malaya? Trust, respect, love? You destroyed all of those things. What's left?" She was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks. "We could rebuild. People make mistakes, Sean. People change." "Some mistakes can't be undone," I said. "Some trust, once broken, can never be repaired." She sank into the chair across from my desk, her shoulders shaking. "So that's it? 2 years together and you're just going to throw it all away?" "I didn't throw anything away, Malaya. You did. You threw it away when you decided I wasn't good enough. You threw it away when you started seeing other men. You threw it away when you humiliated me in that restaurant." "I was trying to protect myself," she sobbed. "I was trying to secure my future." "No," I said, standing up and walking to the window. "You were trying to have everything without earning any of it. You wanted the security of a relationship with me while keeping your options open for someone wealthier. You wanted to use me as backup while you pursued your real goals." I turned back to face her. "The tragedy, Malaya, is that I would have given you everything anyway. Not because you demanded it or manipulated me for it, but because I loved you. I would have shared my success with you, built a future with you, supported your dreams, but you never gave me the chance because you never saw me as worthy of that kind of partnership." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "It's not too late. We could start over. I could prove to you that I've changed." "How? By staying with me now that you know I have money?" "That doesn't prove you've changed, Malaya. That proves you're still the same person who only values relationships based on what they can provide." The silence stretched between us until she finally spoke again, her voice barely a whisper. "What can I do? Tell me what I can do to fix this." I returned to my desk and sat down. "There's nothing you can do. The person I thought I was in love with never existed. She was a performance, a carefully crafted character designed to keep me interested while you pursued other options. I can't love someone who isn't real." Malaya sat there for another minute, perhaps hoping I would change my mind or offer her some path to redemption. But there wasn't one. Some betrayals are too fundamental, too complete to ever overcome. Finally, she stood up slowly, like an old woman, despite being only 38. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I'm truly sorry for everything. I know you are, I said gently. But being sorry doesn't change what happened. It doesn't undo the damage. She walked to the door, then turned back one last time. I hope you find someone who deserves you. After she left, I sat alone in my office as the sun set over Central Park. The city lights began to twinkle outside my windows, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. The phone rang again, another call from Margaret according to the caller ID. This time I answered. Sean? Her voice was strained, frantic. Thank God, we need to talk. Malaya is falling apart. She's talking about leaving the city, starting over somewhere else. That might be good for her, I said. You can't be serious. You're going to let her throw her life away over one mistake? One mistake? I almost laughed. Margaret, she was cheating on me with multiple men while planning our wedding. Your family helped her do it. This wasn't one mistake. This was a pattern of deception that went on for months. But you have the power to fix this, Margaret pleaded. You have the money, the success. You could give her the life she always dreamed of. The life she always dreamed of, I repeated. Not the life we could have built together. Not a partnership based on love and respect. Just the lifestyle she wanted, regardless of who provided it. Margaret was quiet for a moment. We were wrong about you, Sean. We admit that. But doesn't family mean anything? Don't 2 years together count for something? Family, I said, means people who love and support each other unconditionally. People who see value in each other beyond money and status. You never treated me like family, Margaret. You treated me like an obstacle to your daughter's social advancement. That's not true. It is true. And now that you know I have money, you want to pretend the past 2 years never happened. You want to rewrite history and claim that you always supported our relationship. But I remember every dismissive comment, every comparison to more successful men, every time you made it clear that I wasn't good enough for Malaya. I could hear her crying on the other end of the line. What about forgiveness? What about second chances? Some people deserve second chances, I said. But some betrayals are too fundamental to forgive. This isn't about anger or revenge, Margaret. This is about recognizing that Malaya and I want fundamentally different things from life and from relationships. She loves you, Margaret whispered. She loves what she thinks I can give her, I corrected. There's a difference. After I hung up, I realized that this conversation had given me the closure I needed. The desperate calls, the pleading, the attempts to negotiate their way back into my life. None of it was about love or genuine remorse. It was all about the money they now knew I had. They had revealed their true nature when they thought I was poor, and they were revealing it again now that they knew I was rich. In both cases, their focus was entirely on my financial status, never on me as a person. Tomorrow I would begin the final chapter of this story. But tonight I felt free for the first time in months. The weight of their expectations, their judgment, their conditional acceptance was finally lifting from my shoulders. I was ready to move forward, to find people who would value me for who I was rather than what I could provide. And for the first time since that Saturday afternoon at Marconi's, I felt genuinely excited about what the future might hold. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where it all began. Marconi's Italian restaurant, but this time I wasn't alone, and I wasn't there to be humiliated. I was there to celebrate. The October evening was crisp and clear, and the restaurant's warm light spilled onto the sidewalk through its large windows. Inside, the familiar smell of garlic and fresh basil brought back memories of that terrible Saturday afternoon in March, but they no longer held any power over me. "Are you sure about this place?" asked Sarah, squeezing my hand gently. "We could go somewhere else." I smiled down at her, marveling again at how different everything felt with someone who genuinely cared about me. Sarah Chen was nothing like Malaya. She was warm where Malaya had been calculating, genuine where Malaya had been manipulative, content with simple pleasures where Malaya had demanded luxury. "I'm sure," I said. "This is where I learned the most important lesson of my life." Sarah was a pediatric nurse I had met 4 months earlier at a charity event my company had sponsored. She drove a 7-year-old Toyota, lived in a modest apartment in Brooklyn, and had no idea about my financial situation when she agreed to our first coffee date. For the first time in years, I was experiencing what it felt like to be loved for who I was, rather than what I could provide. We had been taking things slowly, building our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect. I had told her about Malaya early on, not in great detail, but enough for her to understand why trust was important to me. She had shared her own story of a failed engagement to a man who had expected her to give up her career to support his ambitions. "Table for Harrison," I told the hostess, who smiled and led us to a quiet booth in the back. As we walked past the spot where I had been publicly humiliated 6 months earlier, I felt nothing but gratitude. That moment of pain had led me to this moment of genuine happiness. Tony, the same waiter who had witnessed the breakup, approached our table with a knowing smile. "Mr. Harrison," he said warmly, "good to see you again. You look much happier." "I am," I said, meaning it completely. "Tony, I'd like you to meet Sarah." As we enjoyed our dinner, Sarah told me about her day at the Children's Hospital, her eyes lighting up as she described a young patient who had finally responded to treatment. Her passion for her work, her genuine care for others, and her complete lack of interest in material possessions reminded me what real values looked like. "I have something to tell you," I said as we shared dessert. "Something I should have told you weeks ago." Sarah's expression grew serious. "What is it?" I reached across the table and took her hands. "My business is doing better than I've let on. Much better." She frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm wealthy, Sarah. Very wealthy. I own a multi-million-dollar company, I live modestly by choice, and I've been waiting to see how you felt about me before I shared that information." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, processing what I had told her. "So when you said you were a consultant—" "I am a consultant, I just didn't mention the scale of my operation." She leaned back in her seat, studying my face. "You were testing me." "I was protecting myself," I said honestly. "I learned the hard way that money changes how people see you, and I needed to know that what we have is real." Sarah was quiet for another moment, then smiled. "And what we have is real, isn't it?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." She squeezed my hands. "Then your bank account doesn't change anything. I fell in love with the man who brings me coffee when I work double shifts, who listens to my stories about difficult patients, who holds my hand during sad movies. I don't care if you have $12 or $12 million. $12 million is closer to accurate," I admitted. Sarah's eyes widened slightly, then she started laughing. "You know what? Good for you, but tomorrow I'm still going to pay for my own lunch like I always do." That night, as we walked through Central Park under the stars, I felt a peace I hadn't known was possible. Sarah wasn't interested in changing me, upgrading me, or using me as a stepping stone to something better. She simply enjoyed my company, valued our conversations, and appreciated the small gestures that had nothing to do with money. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we sat on a bench overlooking the pond. "Anything." "What happened to Malaya? The woman from before?" I had wondered when this question would come up. "Her world fell apart pretty completely. The affair with Richard Blackwood became public when his wife filed for divorce. The other relationships ended badly. Her family's reputation in their social circle was damaged. Last I heard, she had moved to California to start over." "Do you ever feel sorry for her?" I considered the question carefully. "I feel sorry for the person she might have been if she had made different choices, but I don't regret how things ended. She taught me that compatibility isn't just about attraction or shared interests. It's about shared values." Sarah nodded. "My ex taught me something similar. He wanted me to quit nursing because he said it wasn't prestigious enough for his political ambitions. He couldn't understand that helping people gave my life meaning." "What did you do?" "I gave him back his ring and told him to find someone whose dreams mattered less than his image." I smiled, admiring her strength. "No regrets?" "None," she said firmly. Just like you, I learned that some people love you for who you are, and others love you for what they think you can do for them. The trick is figuring out which is which before you waste too much time. As we made our way back to her apartment, my phone buzzed with a text message. I almost ignored it, but something made me glance at the screen. It was from an unknown number, but I recognized the message immediately. "I saw your engagement announcement in the Times. She's beautiful. I hope you're happy." Sarah noticed my expression. "Everything okay?" I showed her the message. "Malaya saw our engagement announcement." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "We're engaged?" I stopped walking and turned to face her, suddenly nervous. I was hoping we could be. I pulled out a small velvet box from my jacket pocket. Inside was a ring that had taken me weeks to choose, not because of its price, but because I wanted something that reflected Sarah's personality. Elegant but not ostentatious, beautiful but practical. "Sarah Chen," I said, dropping to one knee right there on the sidewalk, "will you marry me?" Her hands flew to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. "Are you serious?" "Completely serious. I love you. I love your kindness, your strength, your complete disregard for anything that doesn't matter. I love that you see the best in people, including me. I love that you'd rather spend a Saturday volunteering at the free clinic than shopping for things you don't need." She was crying now, nodding before I even finished the question. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, of course." As I slipped the ring onto her finger, a small crowd of strangers who had stopped to watch began applauding. Sarah laughed through her tears, and I felt like the luckiest man in the world. Later that night, as we called our families to share the news, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. The pain of Malaya's betrayal had been real and deep, but it had also been necessary. It had forced me to examine what I really wanted from life and from love. I had learned that true partnership isn't about what two people can get from each other, but about what they can build together. I had discovered that genuine love doesn't seek to upgrade or improve. It accepts and cherishes what already exists. Most importantly, I had realized that the right person doesn't need to be convinced of your worth. They see it immediately and never question it. 3 months later, Sarah and I were married in a small ceremony at the Botanical Gardens in Brooklyn. My parents were there, along with Elena and a few close friends. Sarah's family filled the other side, warm and welcoming people who had accepted me immediately and completely. As we exchanged vows under an arbor of autumn leaves, I thought about the promises we were making. They weren't about financial security or social status or material comfort. They were about being true partners through whatever life might bring, about supporting each other's dreams without losing our own, about building something together that was stronger than either of us could create alone. When the minister pronounced us husband and wife, Sarah smiled at me with such pure joy that I felt my heart might burst. This was what love was supposed to feel like. Not conditional or calculating, but generous and sure. At the reception, Elena gave a toast that brought tears to my eyes. "I've known Sean for 5 years," she said, raising her glass, "and I've never seen him as happy as he is with Sarah. She brings out the best in him, not by demanding that he change, but by loving exactly who he is." As the evening wound down and Sarah and I danced to our favorite song, she whispered in my ear, "Thank you for waiting for me." "Thank you for being worth the wait," I replied. Later, as we drove away to begin our honeymoon, I thought about Malaya one last time. I hoped she had found peace in California, that she had learned from her mistakes and was building a life based on something more solid than financial transactions. But mostly I was grateful. Grateful for the pain that had taught me to recognize real love when it found me. Grateful for the test that had revealed both Malaya's true nature and Sarah's genuine heart. Grateful for the journey that had led me to understand that the best revenge isn't causing someone else pain, it's finding your own happiness. As Sarah fell asleep beside me on the plane to our honeymoon destination, her hand still wearing the engagement ring and now a simple wedding band, I felt complete in a way I never had before. I had found my person, my partner, my equal, someone who loved me, not for what I could give her, but for who I was when I gave nothing but myself. And for the first time in my life, that felt like more than enough. It felt like everything.